How does it look? All right?
Look, we're well in screen.
Hey.
Use your soccer coach voice.
Onegaishimasu. No, that's far enough. Don't go. I'm not going to go much further.
Okay.
Just there, as long as you can see feet,
Yeah.
hands.
Feet and hands.
That's good. All right. Very good. Hey, onegaishimasu. Welcome back to the Goju Karate Center. Zoe and Archer are going back into the house. It's a rather cold, glum evening in Johannesburg, South Africa. So if you're joining us from wherever you are in the world, I hope the weather is a little bit more exciting than we have at the moment. We're grateful for the rains. We've just finished our winter, which is rather dry. So it's been raining quite constantly for the last couple of days. So a couple of weeks ago, somebody left a comment on the channel asking us to do a full breakdown of the warm-up, and I suspect why certain things are done in a certain way on the warm-up. Now, as the phone is set up right now and we're recording, I can't see the screen, so obviously in the backup house, in the next while, Zoe will probably be doing some commentary, etc., and answering some questions. Should it happen that nothing happens in backup house until after the video has been converted to a video, please don't feel like just drop us a message, ask questions. Hopefully we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Alright, so we're going to start with the basic idea of what would happen in a warm-up. Now, I like a little bit of cardio just to increase the heart rate and to increase the overall body core temperature. So typically what we would start off with, maybe running on the spot for a little bit. Nothing crazy, you know, we just often in the dojo you have 15 minutes to get warm in a 1 hour class. That's 25% dedicated to warm-up. But in a much longer environment, you could take the warm-up up to 45 minutes to an hour and do an extensive bit of training. All right, so now maybe a little open and close. Concentrate on staying on the balls of your feet. So you might start with jumping on the spot, balls of your feet, singles, doubles, so all kind of variations, corner, corner, switching. So all of these kind of bounce and agility based exercises, feet together, jumping sideways. These are all very, very good for just getting your core temperature up, forward and back. Alternating legs this way. These in no particular order. Star jumps, corner, corner, forward and back, hands up, and then twisting. And I'm going to stop there. So, we elevate the core temperature. Depending on how cold it is, we do more or less. Thereafter, I like to start very much from the toes, working up through the body. And this is the common way of doing the Goju warm-up. So, put our feet together, hands on our hips. You can grab your belt, put your hands on your hips. You can relax. Depends on the school. 1, 2, and just that big toe, up, down. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now the remaining toes. So press the big toe down, and this is critical later on in some of your stances, in your kata, to be able to press that big toe down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Please be vigilant. When you do these exercises, don't lift your big toe up by rolling your knees out. And don't lift your other toes up by rolling your knees in. This is very, very difficult to get that control over the toes. And it is critical for our stances and for kicking. So we want to keep the legs straight, lift up those big toes. And if we go to the next exercise, which is simply altering or alternating, we don't want to get the legs buckling and bending. We really want to concentrate on big toes up, little toes, big toes, little toes, big toes, little toes, big toes, little toes. Oh, there we go. And you literally work through it. Okay? So we finish with our big toes, little toes. I then move usually onto the ankle. So now I keep the exercise the same. I roll onto the blade of the foot and in. So now this is a different exercise. And now you will see my knees will drop and roll, drop and roll. Okay, I can also do it. Sometimes call this the skateboard. And we just roll side to side. And these exercises are more about ankle warming up, but also a little bit of conditioning on a hard surface. I'm conditioning the side of my foot, the side of my foot. Another exercise you can do is just taking it on a singular. One leg flat, other foot, you're concentrating on rolling that foot, rolling that ankle. So you're not moving here, and there should be no twisting or compensating with your body. And this is important, the higher your belt, that you keep your center line as you're doing these kind of exercises. So as you're warming up, if I'm doing a single leg, I'm not losing that center line. What tends to happen when I roll, my body tends to go. If I can keep my center line and roll my feet, that might be a little bit more difficult. Okay, we've got to have both expansive and then also highly concentrated exercises as we go. And this concept permeates throughout the entire warm-up. All right, so the flexibility is driven by the bigger movements, and then the concentrated movements are very, very specific to what we do in karate. Next part of this, up on the toes and back on the heels. So up on the toes, back on the heels. So we do this, and you probably do this about 10 times in a run-of-the-mill kind of warm-up. And you're concentrating on getting onto the ball of the foot. So I want you to think, when I go on the ball of my foot, there's my Mae-geri, the ball of the foot type, Mawashi-geri type kicks. When I go onto my heel, Kansetsu-geri, and Yoko-geri, and Ushira-geri, and Kikato-geri. So on a hard surface, I'm slowly and systematically conditioning the bones in my feet, letting them become a little bit harder. And this happens naturally to us when we walk around barefoot, but when we wear takis all the time, or sneakers, what tends to happen, our feet get a little bit softer. And so in the dojo on a hard surface, there's a time and a place for it. If you do too much, you may end up hurting the feet. If you do too much too soon, or if you've worn shoes for too long a period and you suddenly come into this, you might end up with slightly sore feet as we're going on. So I've generally gone through the toes, the ankle, and then the heel and the flexion extension on the actual foot. Other exercises we tend to like doing, we tend to like trying to crawl with our toes, and it's very hard to crawl backwards, so we often just go forward and we're moving ourselves along and back. And again, this is important for strength in the actual toes. So we've got the muscles that drive the majority of the leg, but inside the foot there are very small muscles. We need to develop them. Same as in the hand muscles inside the hands. The majority of the muscles that govern the action of the hand and the wrist are in the forearm. However, within the structure of the hand, we have got muscles that are in between the various bones and in between the various joints. We have to condition those as well, and we have to warm them up, otherwise we get injured. Okay, so we've gone toes, ankles. Our next major joint that we work on, as you can see, we're running through the joints, are probably the knees. Now, in between that, traditionally is an exercise like this. But what we found is because some children really struggle with their balance, we tend to do the ankles separate. We do 10 rotations, 10 times up and down on the actual ankle joint. Then we come up and we do 10 rotations 10 rotations, and 10 extensions of the leg without losing too much posture, too much balance. We don't want this happening. We really want to concentrate on trying to keep the head above the hips, and we want to try and concentrate on developing the muscles in the leg. When I was a child, it was the ankle in this position. I found that a lot of my students really struggle with that. They're falling all over the place. So I made an easier version, and if you wanted to, a more difficult version. And I could do all 3 exercises the same, and then move to a bigger movement, and then I move up to the next joint. Moving on to our hips. Traditionally, start maybe easier with some rotation and trying to expand that circle from the hips, feeling very, very relaxed. Here, you want to keep your head above the center of the floor, and imagine it's like a piece of string that you're throwing around. So you're throwing the buttocks out and around. That hip joint is literally moving all the way around. And we're slowly just getting the blood to circulate through our body. Okay, back to classical physical education. Along the way, you will find that some people like to move into windmills and exercises like that. We tend to want to go into the side quite a lot. So for me, I practice teapot. You know, I'm a teapot, short and stout. Here's my handle, here's my spout. I just throw it over my head rather, and we stretch up and then try and reach up 45 degrees. And this is a slightly more basic version of something else that will come shortly after. So again, just getting that hip across and extending with the hand. Now, over time, we've worked on a whole bunch of other ideas. So here's another variation. This is a combination of the back of the arm, the tricep stretch, and leaning to the side to increase the range of the stretch. The more senior you are in Goju, and also more mature you are, so not really a kiddie, but more maybe an adult, the more you will be inclined to be doing more washoke. So the blocking component, normally something like this. So one idea, and this is the way I always remember it as a child, was that if my hand's on top here, that hand's going on top there. So when I come up, this hand is now on top, and over, and over. Along the way, somebody went, now you must turn it, go over. So, from here, this hand, 1, 2, and then it becomes a little bit more complicated and awkward. The physical education teacher in me says it's easier to keep it simple and to work on what works out logically and what is our goal from doing this exercise. The goal is to get our body to be pressing and flexing and extending and working on lateral flexibility. So this hand coming over makes a bit of sense, and this hand just pressing and pushing and getting my hands down. It's just, you know, why complicate it? We then move to the back. If this hand's on top, we push around to the back and push around to the back, round to the back, round to the back. We also have from here push to the ground. Now, the way to imagine this is the way the Congo cane works. If I roll it one way, I get to a lock. When I unwind it, it goes in the opposite direction. So I roll it one way, I get to the lock, I go the other way over, and I switch. Okay, so then 1, 2. And again, the more we complicate it, the harder it becomes. So now you're going to remember the hand that's on the top becomes the first part of the block. Hand that's on the top becomes the first part of the block. Hand that's on the top comes the first part of the block. Alright, so we're now gradually moving up through our body. We're starting to work on rotation through the torso, a little bit of flexion and extension in through the spine, and typically now you will find maybe stretching towards the front and breathing out to the back. Sometimes with a very extensive lift and drop, sometimes a little bit more relaxed, hang and press. Now, again, very important part of our training, we do the one variation, because now we're doing, one of the kids in the dojo, I call him a kid, he's actually an adult now, he's the swim coach and he makes the kids practice pencils. And then he makes them do the bendy pencil. Alright, so this, just raising the arms and stretching up, you're stretching all of this, so this is very good. Okay, coming down, relaxing, and coming back up, looking back, breathing out, and we'll go through this now. There are variations of this, there's 3 touches, so front, middle, back, front, middle, back. Maybe you're super flexible and so you have to bring your feet together. You can see I'm like not practicing enough flexibility, so front, middle, back. Very important stretch built into these stretches is the crossover. So taking a leg and crossing a leg over and stretching down and forcing the stretch. And the focus is actually on something called the ITB, the iliotibial band. Starts about here on the bottom leg, runs over the knee joint, runs up, and it's a neglected part of the body. It's quite a long strip of connective tissue, and then at the top, small muscle called the tensor fasciolata. Now that often gets very tight, and it affects the range and the flexibility of our legs. So it's important from time to time to get that stretch in and to work on that stretch. Now, I'm working perfectly hard on that stretch and I am not damaging my back. So I'm going to cross over and I'm literally going to have the feeling that somebody's putting my ears forward and I'm just stretching until I can feel the stretch. The important part is that I feel the stretch, not that I feel this huge amount of pain that I then say, well, okay, now I'm stretching. I should just feel that the muscle is starting to pull, and then it's like, okay, that's the limit of my motion, and I just need to hold it there. And then I can relax a little bit and do it again and again. Remember, a lot of this is still preliminary. It's still warming up. So we're just trying to get those joints moving. You can see, a lot of the time I'm standing, but my hips are moving, and my legs are beating and bopping, and that's not the fact that I've had 5 cups of coffee today. It's the idea that I'm just trying to get the blood pumping through my body. We've moved that energy up through the body. The next place it goes to is into the shoulders. Alright, so typically what we like to do, starting with a little bit of swinging, generally start slow on the swinging, and as your joint warms up and the blood flow increases into the joint, you can then start going a little bit faster and faster and faster. Now, coordination is critical to what we do. So moving one arm forward, one arm back, and then obviously changing it helps us develop that coordination. But also, it helps us to develop the idea that one arm moves in one direction and the other moves in the other. And the best example is this arm's going up, this one's going back. Alright, and that's typical to karate coordination. So in your warming up, especially with your children, and you're trying to develop coordination in their karate, there's a lot of stuff that would typically be like weird warm-up exercises. The aeroplane in reverse, one arm this way, and then suddenly it becomes this. Alright. One of my green belts teaches the warm-up like that when he teaches the little E's. He's here for 2 classes and I was so surprised to watch him go Swing arms forward, swing arms back, elbows, elbows, hands like this, and from there he got them into one arm forward, one arm back. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And you know, this is coming from a little green belt, like 10 years old. Okay, so we get into this. Now we can get to the more dynamic swinging, dropping type exercises where we're trying to increase the range of motion on the joint, a little bit dynamic, and with our body working. We can also do up this way, and sometimes up and down this way. My training and my time with Sensei Ronnie Kluger, his upswing often used to focus on koke, and the downswing, palm down, so either osai or teisho or gedan shotaioke. So doing, and they'd have it with the 2 bounce. 1, 2, 1, 2. Alright, it's a really interesting bit, and again, super useful in our warming up exercises. We get to the elbow joints, we've got rotation, hurricane. So just bringing those arms out, doing a little hurricane. Now, taking a karate exercise, building it into the warm-ups, punch, hurricane, punch, hurricane. And again, now I'm trying to pull ideas together. I'm grounding with the big toes from some of the first exercises. I'm rotating through the hips from the exercises as I got higher up. I'm doing a variety of hand movements that are both thrusting and extension on the joint, as well as crossing my midline and using the back of the hand. And then just a little bit of rhythm and speed. And in the middle of the warm-up, we're starting to get that body a little bit warmer. Okay, so I've kind of gone through all those joints up to there. We're on to the wrists. So I like to shake the wrists out, shake the wrists out. And the way I put it, small circles. Again, we're just trying to get the blood flowing into the joint first. All right, might be a bit of a deviation from the traditional kind of exercises. Right, down, pressing, wrist, fingers, thumb, up, wrist, fingers, fingertips, thumb, from the front, wrist, fingers, and onto that thumb. So you would run through all of these exercises and working on coordination. Other ideas, bending that wrist, pulling the fingers back, working to pull the fingers back. So ich, ni, san, shi, go, ruk, sit, hat, ku, ju. Bend the wrist if you want. Ich, ni, san, chi, go, ruk, sit, hat, ku, ju. Fingers, so not straight, a little bit of a bend. Ich, ni, san, chi, go, ruk, sit, hat, ku, ju. Wrist, ich, ni, san, chi, go, ruk, sit, hat, ku, ju. Thumbs. Thumb down. Use your fingers, grab on, pull. Some people do it the other way, or they do it this way, where they grab onto this side and thumb to thumb, and then pull. It doesn't really matter. The focus is pull the thumb here, stretch the wrist, and don't let the fingers go in every possible direction. Let's try and keep them kind of together as we stretch. So ich, ni, san, chi, go, change. Don't lose contact. Ich, ni, san, chi, go. Don't lose contact. Wrist exercise. Ich, ni, san, chi, go. Don't lose contact. Ich, ni, san, chi, go. Obviously, you do as many as you need. Ich, ni, san, chi, go. It doesn't help to go Got to keep that elbow down. Think about Chidano, okay? Bend that hand and then work in that position. Ich, ni, san, chi, go. Don't lose contact. Ich, ni, san, chi, go. Now you can do all of them. Finger, ich, ni, san, chi, go. Finger, ich, san, chi, go. Wrist, and the whole time not losing contact at all. All right, and finally rotation and grabbing on rotation. So fingers down, another fantastic stretch, and this is going to work on the wrist flexibility, but more importantly the flexibility across this elbow joint as we extend that arm and push downward. And this is important for palm strike to the groin. It's important for things like muwashi uke, as well as when you do movements like this in your kata. It doesn't help if your hand is here when we're working very hard to get that wrist bent. Same as this. Think about it. It's cipher. This hand's doing cipher, but I'm stretching. And one of the things I always bring up when I do this particular stretch, we're stretching. We're not saying our evening prayers, because some people misconstrue it, and that creates chaos sometimes in some dojos. Stretching so we can be good at cipher, or we can be good at seiyunshin, or we can be good at sisoshin. And rather put the karate first, so that people don't read into things in a funny way. It's just like, it's happened a couple of times. So we've got fingers, top, fingers bottom, bottom, top, okay, down. We've done everything there. Very important, probably one of the most neglected exercises in warm-ups. Just simply making a fist. Starting with the index finger, rolling really tight. You want to concentrate, you want to roll that finger in. I'm going to just come a bit closer, hopefully I'm in shot still. Roll it in, and you want to go through each one and then push that thumb across the top. So this is number one. Starting with the index finger, rolling and across. Number two, start with the pinky fingers, and now we turn our hands this way maybe. And number three, this way maybe. So I often go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. And again, we're working on tightening the hands. Now, if we take it back a little bit to maybe a group of children, very young children, other exercises I like to do when I work with the hands, I often do this. I get the kids to go fist, open, fist, open. Once they can get nice hands, I don't know how many of you struggle with kids whose fingers are all open and they bow and they yaw and their fingers all just getting that all in and nice and tight, and that there's not too much flexion or flexion going that way on the fingertips, but that they can keep that straight and keep the fingers and the pinky in. We have a lot of people who drink tea. It's very hard. I'm guilty of this from time to time. Please look in the videos. You'll check I drink tea quite frequently. You know, drinking tea. We need to keep those fingers in, and we're trying to condition that. It's just hand control at first. It's developing good hand position for children. If you're a senior and your hands are stronger, it's a different kettle of fish. But for children, it's important. Next thing, open, 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 open. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I do these exercises simply because I know children struggle with them, and it helps them improve their dexterity. And we're trying to get that. It's part of what we do as karate instructors. We have to prepare them, not just for karate, but to be absolutely more physically capable and more in touch with their body. And that is a critical part of where our warm-ups are fantastic. So we've done our hands on the shoulder, looking sideways. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is the way most people would do this particular exercise. For a little bit more emphasis on what you're doing, As the hands are on the shoulder, if I look to my left side, I pull that right elbow in. And I switch it over. Switch it over. Switch it over. Switch it over. And over. Another good idea is to turn sideways. So if you have a mirror and you're practicing it with the mirror, what you want to do is you want to get to the point where you're not looking that way, but that both your ears, both your eyes are turning without twisting your whole body. So this is really working on getting that head across and the chin across. Some people end up with their head doing funny things. And it's critical, especially if you develop kata, and in particular kata for tournament. What you really want to do is you want to make sure that that head is fully twisted, the eyes are looking nice and straight, not down, not up, not wandering. So getting that right across, increasing that stretch as you go, pulling and working. Right, next exercise, I ask my students to put their hands down. When the hands on the shoulder, it's easy to raise the shoulder. So I want them to concentrate, hands down, and I want to drop that ear to the shoulder. And what I ask them to do is imagine they are pressing on a table so that they're working on that wrist at the same time. You could have a long hold, so you could be like 15 seconds, change 15 seconds. You might have 1, 2, 3. It's up to you. Obviously, the long hold is more beneficial in terms of a slow static stretch, and the more dynamic stuff is more just to help the neck develop a certain amount of strength. Hands on the head, pressing. I'm going to jump to this first because we've just done sideways and that. And this is important because as I'm applying pressure, now I'm starting to condition these muscles in the neck. We tend to neglect our neck muscles quite a lot, using two hands and pulling down, pressing front. So we've got front, back, side, side. These are critical exercises. We tend to forget about them, but if you're doing any kind of grappling, groundwork, anything on the floor, if we're not conditioning this neck, we're setting ourselves up for a risky bit of business later on when somebody hurts their neck because they rolled onto it a little bit funny and it got cramped. So we do need to have increased flexibility training for our neck, as well as increased resistance and increased conditioning of these neck muscles so that we can develop a stronger neck. All right, and a lot of our exercises, such as the next exercise, will help us to develop that. When we do this, a lot of people tend to put their hands on their hips and they raise their shoulders. This is a bit of a no-no. So again, I like to encourage my students, shoulders down, very similar to a lot of our karate is shoulders down. So shoulders down, head back. Breathing in and out, in and out. And this will work very well with exercises that come later on where we drop and we look up. As we look up, we're breathing out. So that's where I take my breathing mechanism from. So as I drop, head goes back. Obviously, extremely slow-mo and far more dynamic kind of exercise. So we've gotten to the end of the generic kind of loosening up and limbering up kind of exercises. And normally, if you're doing about a 10 to 15 minute warm-up in a 1 hour class, most senseis are pretty okay with this. Some senseis will want a little bit more. They will want a little bit of stance work. They'll want a little bit more work through the hips, a little bit more work through the arms. Okay, so I'm not getting to PT yet. We're just going to go on to some of the basic stretching ideas. So these now become a little bit more advanced. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm just going to turn this leg out. And so I've got a Zenkutsurach, and now I'm just rolling and locking that hip. But I'm concentrating on keeping my feet parallel. A lot of people will do both feet this way and hip open, tighten. So itch, knee. And the focus here for most people ought to be the calf and the Achilles tendon as you're stretching that. Sun, chi, and go. And if I rotate, go to the other side, ich, knee, sun, chi, go. I'm going to do the exercise slightly differently now. I'm going to bend this leg this way. I'm going to have my body in this awkward position. And now I'm going to concentrate on ich. So I lift my heel, bend my knee, body back. And as I press forward, now the focus is hip. And trying to push my hips forward and getting my knee over my toes and getting myself into that grounded stance. So sun, chi, and go, and again, other side. So I can start with the bigger movement and move in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. From there, obviously, the next thing is shikodachi. For a lot of schools, shikodachi may be something along the lines of first position, second position, third position, fourth, fifth, sixth. And that way, my knee is somewhere between my bridge of my foot and my toes when I drop down and I want to concentrate on pulling my knees back and my body weight down. When we tend to teach children, we tend to end up getting them into a lower stance. And that's because they have added flexibility. However, when you watch a lot of the very senior karate people, their shikodachi is not necessarily all the way up here, but it tends to be a little bit lower. And they tend to focus on having the buttocks on about the same height as the knees. So the base of the buttocks on the same height as the knees, so that there is steadiness, but there's still mobility. And I think as we get older, finding that balance is critical for us. However, when we stretch, we really do need to work on increasing the range of motion in that position. So shikodachi, one way. The next thing is a very common stretch. People think that they're doing stretching in their shikodachi, but in actual fact, we're starting to move into the torso. Taking one hand, putting it on the knee, other hand a little bit relaxed, dropping the shoulder and rotating the torso as you're doing it. So this is sometimes called a shoulder drop, but it's a stretch on the torso, and you would have on both sides. And then finally, dropping a little bit lower, grabbing the ankles sometimes, but concentrating on pushing those knees backwards. Very common as a precursor to stretching our legs as we work. Next thing is something similar to Shotokan's back stance. Now, not a very common position in Goju, but very good for our warming up. In particular, the hamstring and into the calf. So pressing down and stretching, and you will see that this is quite a common stretch being done a lot of the time in dojos. And then gradually we will move up until we get to the point where we will drop into this kind of position, both heels flat on the floor, and you may be bracing yourself with the hands on the floor, and then transitioning. And as you become a little bit more dynamic and more capable, what you will find is that you will keep your hands out and you will transition up and down and or straight across, and working on your natural flexion and extension through that position. The splits. The most common thing that people ask is, will you teach me to do the full splits? And I'm like, yeah, I'll show you a few things. You go home and practice, because I don't find it particularly useful to be able to do the full splits and to obsess about it. I think that it's just part of what we do, and if you happen to end up in the full splits, great. But if we look at what our splits are going to do for us, number one, the further out we move our feet, and the more we keep them on the floor for traction, the more we're developing our ability to use the proper receptors in the foot and the leg. That's why the previous exercise was so important. And now gradually pushing down and increasing the flexibility somehow, stretching and dropping down, and then holding that. When your feet are wet with sweat and the dojo floor doesn't have any oils on it or a little bit of dust, then you tend to end up going really, really flat really quickly. Okay? Next thing is hands on the floor, rotation and pushing, lift toes on one side, heel on the other side, and same on that side. And then sitting backwards. And the first thing I would try and get people to do is to sit upright. Most people slouch. So get people to put their legs in this position, get them to sit upright, and if need be, put their hands behind their back, prop themselves up, and then push their hips forward slightly, so that just the sitting position is now already forcing an increased slow static stretch through the bottom of the legs and through the glutes. All right? Turning circles with the toes. So this is a bit of a neural stretch, and it's important because as we grow older, the muscles may be reasonably flexible, the bones become far more rigid, as do the nerves. So we really want to work and keep those nerves as flexible so we don't get that funny, weird, cramping sensation. Next thing, lifting up and just jiggling the butt. All right, I know it looks terrible, but just trying to jiggle that butt and then repositioning the buttocks down. And you'll notice as I'm doing it, I'm constantly pushing myself more and more forward. So I'm working very hard, I'm trying to get myself upright. I'm using my arms to brace. My arms are taking quite a lot of that weight. So over time, what you have to gravitate to is that the hands must be in front of the body. Once I'm in this position, we can now start working on upright. And again, remember that pencil stretch, upright, and just holding. And this is a very good conditioning exercise, a little bit of a postural exercise, and it precedes dropping to the side. And now we're doing a lateral side stretch at the same time, and lateral side stretch. Right? A lot of us want to work on that rotation, so what we tend to do is rotate and stretch down. And we come up and we rotate, stretch down, and obviously stretching forward. Ideas on stretching forward, using the hands to help the students count. So that they try and get their hands further and further forward until they can feel that they're actually stretching themselves more and more forward. Now, move from there, butterfly stretch, one of my favorite stretches, probably because it takes no effort. You simply put your feet together, pull the feet in, and then drop the knees on the floor. But a lot of people require the bouncing, a lot of people require hands. What tends to happen is that people tend to collapse in this position. So try again, keep the posture. The posture is critical. And then you would be bouncing. Ideas from here, extension on the foot. So grabbing and extending that foot up and out, as well as back behind you. All right, and these are very useful for that hip, but also hamstrings, posture, extension, arm. And again, going behind us. Another idea, sitting very relaxed, dropping the knees. And again, this is just warming up those hips a little bit more. And we can go outside 10 times, inside 10 times. We can alternate inside and outside between the legs. And we get this kind of rotation. So, I've done a lot of modern and contemporary kind of movements alongside some of the traditional bits of the warm-up, the Yumbi Undo that is practiced in most schools of Goju. Okay? And I think there's place and capacity for us to apply slightly more modern ideas from time to time, but never to forsake exercises that came from our senseis. Other things that are critical in our warm-up: knee touch, opposite for coordination, double for vigor. All right, toe touch. So again, it's this dynamic stretching now, something maybe akin to ballistics. And then opposites. And then the double. So doing these exercises the same. Sideways. And here's where you see people doing the compensation. I already did that. Leaning over to raise the leg. Try to keep the head, hip, and maybe bend that knee and balance and try raise that leg. Bend, balance, and raise. From time to time, add that compensation so to get that bigger range of motion so you can feel these muscles stretching dynamically. And then backwards. Okay? So these are all very typical of what are part of our warm-ups. Thrusting exercises, dropping, thrusting, 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 thrusting. One hand or one hand. These are all part of our warm-ups, and you basically just take one of those exercises 10 times. Do the next one 10 times. Jumping, 1, 2, 3, and starting to build that ballistic energy. Very, very common. You'll find, try and land quietly. Okay, so this is another good exercise. It's important for the feet. You're landing on the ball of the foot. It's the same as conditioning for front kick. So it's part and parcel of what we do. Sit-ups, push-ups, star jumps, burpees. These are all conditioning exercises. I like to build them into a more dynamic warm-up where the volume is going to do the work. So typically we do, our dojo is approximately 10 meters across. So it's a run, one side, one push-up, one sit-up, one squat. Next time, 2 runs, 2 push-ups, 2 sit-ups, 2 squats. But take any of the physical education type torture exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, leg raises, burpees, fit them in, and they work. And then build. So don't do 10 times. You can do that with the babies, all right? Because you might have a shorter training time. But if you're going to do conditioning, especially with teenagers and youngsters who are getting ready for competition, getting ready for black belt gradings, etc., where physicality and the building of the body is critical, 1s, then 2s, then 3s. When they get to their 10th rep, they are doing 10 count, 10 runs, 10 push-ups. They would have done 55 repetitions. If you escalate it and get them up to 15, it's then 120. It's 120 push-ups, 120 runs, 120 sit-ups, 120 squats. And this then, on a timed exercise, is really cool because it helps build people's like self-driven like mechanism. They can push themselves, because last week I did that exercise 1 to 15. The conditions are always the same. So it's a 10-meter run, etc., etc. And it took me 17 minutes. This week I did it in 15 minutes. The week after I did it in 12 and a half. And people can see that they're actually becoming physically stronger over time. And that's powerful because that builds confidence. And that's what we're really doing a lot of the time as we're running through exercises. So I've run through a lot of stuff, and as we've gotten towards the end, I've kind of just babbled on about some of the exercises. So for those of you who are doing warm-ups, yubi-undo in a very traditional, very regimental way, it's super fantastic because in that process, what we're doing is we're preserving the teachings from the 1920s when I think Miyagi Sensei, with the aid of medical practitioners, came up with a lot of the exercises that we're doing. What's really interesting is to combine or to look at some of our stretches and look at some of the ideas that you see in modern day yoga, and you'll see the similarity and you'll see the crossover. It's really, really cool. I enjoy it as somebody who studied physical education. I really like that big crossover. And then because I'm kind of from the Western world, I'm not Japanese, and because I have an upbringing in physical education and I studied physical education at university, I tend to like to take the ideas that apply to multiple sports and bring it all together and then cross it over in my karate and in my warm-ups. I've found over time I've had great results with this. We do, after a certain period of time, do a lot of agility, ladder work, etc. to help build coordination and agility, but speed and power and explosivity. And these are important facets of what we're doing. And the class should not just be a fitness class. Underlying criterion I left it somewhere in the middle of the warm-up as I got going was, in typical warm-up of a class of 1 hour, I might spend between 10 and 15 minutes doing warm-up. However, if I'm doing a gashku or a seminar, warm-ups may take over an hour, because I might do a full traditional warm-up. I might add in a whole round of ballistics and a whole round of explosive exercise and a whole round of plyometrics, if the surface is right and if the students are capable of doing it. From time to time, I do it in a fun way. We have the typical, the kids love it, you know, they do bear walk across the dojo, they run a few times, they side shuffle, they hop on one leg, and you see these little 5-year-olds doing these exercises, and as they do it, they get better and better, their coordination grows. We just have to make sure that we do it in a relatively safe environment and that we nurture them along the way. Bearing in mind that a lot of plyometrics and ballistics, if you do too much too soon and the students don't have the musculature to protect themselves, you do run the risk of injuries, sometimes a little bit of ligamental tears, more than likely something called avulsion tears, or avulsion fractures. The muscles can become so strong that the bone is still so weak that the muscle can pull loose from the bone. So be careful, be vigilant of this, and as always, have fun, do what your sensei says, and yep, we've been about just under an hour, so I hope you enjoyed a rather long live stream. Arigatou gozaimasu. I need to go and cook dinner now for my family. Sayonara. How do we, oh, that one.